Fine.
Sorry.
Okay, we're going to start the Town of Sangerville Board of Selectmen emergency meeting. It's October 22nd, and it's 4 o'clock. And we just skipped the Pledge of Allegiance today?
Sure.
All right. Our meeting's open, and there really is one item on the agenda. It's the Mayo Regional Hospital merger. We had a pretty lengthy discussion with that group last Wednesday, and I just felt like it would be good for the three of us to get to kind of noodle what we felt from all that. And we've had some more correspondence since then. Mm-hmm. And so that's the whole purpose of this. It's just so we can discuss our concerns, what we like, what we don't like, how we might move forward, and so on. So, anybody want to start?
I mean, the concept, and I don't have an issue with that. I definitely see the good of being able to have more doctors in the pool and that to bring to the area. But as an outsider, obviously coming in and not knowing a lot of detail or whatever, but I'm having a hard time grasping the concept of losing the largest asset amongst all of these 13 communities with no guarantee or no commitment, whether or not of any kind, of any level of that commitment process or the hospital process. The other thing that I know the hospital doesn't want to think about it, but that hospital financially is stable at this point. It's not, on one level they show a negative, but on the other side it shows a positive. So it's fairly stable as far as medical, comparing it to other things. So I don't understand the urgency of a merger, or everyone that's in that point, why do you want to lose that control?
Dale, if I can, just on that just so I can add some factual data for you, hopefully. In fact, looking at the margin, this year we are in the red by 1.2 million. Okay, and the year before 1.7 million. And one thing, again, the public needs to understand, and I think this is great, and I agree with Mike, for information it's really, really important, and we need to get more and more out. There's what's called a 340B program, okay? And the 340B program, hey Joe, the 340B program is kind of a system where money comes back from the farm companies and basically from the Walgreens, et cetera, that helped fund us. This year, we were very fortunate to receive a check for almost $800,000. That whole program is under investigation by the feds. I would hope we would continue with that. So, those are just other areas that we have to, consider in terms of looking at this bottom line. But again, those are in fact the numbers and the realistic numbers.
I should mention for the record that our board member, Dr. Cabot, is here, and the SEBEC board member, Gerald Nessman, is here. So that's great, and I would invite both of you to participate anytime you want to. Gerald, before you got here, basically we just kind of stated the rationale for today's meeting. We met with the Mayo team last Wednesday, and the three of us really haven't had a chance to decide exactly how we feel about that whole meeting and how we might proceed. As some background to people who are listening to this meeting, I think part of the reason we were able to glean as much information out of last week's meeting was your select board reached out to us and sent us a letter, and attached to that was some of the concerns that you had. And honestly, speaking for myself, if they had not done that, I believe that we probably would have had smooth sailing on Wednesday, and we would have voted to write the letter of support and just moved on. But sharing that letter with us, I think made, at least me, dig a little bit deeper. And if you would thank them for that, I really appreciate it.
I'll pass it on, yeah.
It was good. In fact, that's one of the things I'm kind of wondering, depending on where we are collectively, is it maybe our turn to send a letter to the 13 districts, sharing some of the concerns that we have. Dale mentioned the lack of commitment, that essentially this is a jump ball. At least that's the way it looks to us. But the process really, I'll admit, probably aggravates me even more. The letter that we got from Mayo that essentially, it told us a story of the difficulties of being in a rural hospital, had some compelling graphs, but at the very end, they noted that we really should consider the fact that our debt of $460,000 will be forgiven along with any possibility of future taxation. Like that was like the last paragraph. But because we had a heads up, we had dug a little bit deeper, and we knew that really was not exactly true, and perhaps even misleading.
It was true.
We did have the debt, but they hadn't. Even high school accounting, you would offset your debts with your assets with your liabilities, and that was not done. In truth, we were not being relieved of our debt as much as we would be agreeing to give away nearly $2 million. I personally went to the Dexter town manager on Friday, and that's exactly what they thought they did. They thought they had relieved themselves of, their number was probably close to $1.5 million, which in truth, their portion of the asset is close to $5 million. They may not mind, they might be happy with that, but I suspect that some communities immediately, like Dexter, jumped on board and said, let's do this, sounds great. And maybe they would have been a little bit more hesitant had they worded that letter differently. So that, I don't know, for me personally, that is really kind of stuck in my craw, which makes me wonder what other things might be just tilted in a certain way so that, you might get the outcome you're looking for. So.
Mike, I didn't quite understand, I think I do now. The $2 million you're talking about is a sale of $28 million in assets, is that correct? It's assuming you're selling $28 million.
If you look at the entire, and what was it Gloria, was her name? The lady in the back?
Nancy.
She kind of, I felt, was reluctant to give us a number, but finally agreed that probably $28 million was a realistic expectation. So yes, if you took our representation in HAD 4, which is roughly 6.5%, our share of $28 million is roughly $2 million.
And that, again, that's on the assumption that you can sell that real estate.
In all fairness, in cash alone, we have $1 million. So, and she was, and we were led to believe that what we had was a debt of $460,000, which, like I said, there was more than twice as much cash as that. So
I'm not sure I understand with $1 million. I'm just confused on where you're coming up with $1 million in cash.
if you look at the reserves, there's our share of the current cash reserves after paying the debt would be nearly $1 million.
Oh, ours going that way. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Thank you.
My understanding with regard to what Nancy Glidden said was, and as far as that letter, is because the HAD is not being dissolved, or is that the right word? Dissolved? Yeah, the dissolution, so dissolved. That the net assets are not there as far as, that because I'm stating stuff that I think we all know, that the HAD is not being dissolved, it's the charter is being amended by emergency legislation, Therefore, that money is not there to be divvied up. So when she stated the number based on what they are planning on doing, that,
Well,
I don't think
Based on their plan,
correct,
their first intention is to pay off all the debt anyway.
correct,
So there would be no debt,
Right.
if we're gonna follow that logic.
right.
Why would we, why would we do that?
Well, the only reason this is reading tea leaves, right? Because I do not have any information as to what the discussion has been between hospital leadership and the hospital's attorney and Eastern Maine. I requested this information back in August. I'm still waiting. The law requires it be provided within 5 days. And I'll get to the bottom of it. I'll proceed and I'll get my information. So, could you just repeat the question?
Why
Yeah.
would HAD 4
Yeah,
want to pay off all of this debt?
it makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense because the reserve funds are invested, and we have an investment manager who invests these funds for a certain cash flow. And these funds generate $350,000 to $400,000 in dividend cash flow each year. We have access to the bond bank, and in preparation for this merger, the board decided not to go to the bond bank to finance its current expansion, which means the board's paying, I don't know how much, but the hospital's paying maybe $100,000 or so in extra interest each year just to provide for this merger. So we could go and we could refinance with the bond bank, and we have the income from the portfolio to pay off, just the dividend income, the market fluctuations don't matter at all, to pay off the debt over time, and probably even more debt if we choose to, or if we need it to continue running the hospital. I think the reason, again, we don't know, other than that apparently a proposal was made by us through our attorney to pay this debt off, which I do not recall. Again, people keep telling me I don't have a good memory, but I don't recall a vote by the board authorizing anything like that. So the attorney submits a proposal that I don't know where it comes from, and it makes no sense other than if the acquiring entity, if we go down the merger route, when you read Moody's last report, it basically say you cannot have a diluted acquisition. So it might make sense on the book of the acquiring entity. It doesn't make any sense at all for Mayo, whether it's part of Eastern Maine as a separate entity, and as they tell us with separate trust funds, to pay off this debt at all. It makes absolutely no sense. You put the institution against the wall when you do that, when you take away its lifeblood. And so that's all I can say. And as far as the value, maybe we should ask Eastern Maine to tell us at what value they plan to book this acquisition when they have it.
So my other question, I guess, for either of you, who is steering this merger? Is HAD 4 steering the merger, or is the hospital administration steering the merger?
Well, I want Gerald, I had a chance to speak, and certainly I want him to be able to express what his feelings are. I think it's important that, we all have input in this. As far as the merger goes and the thoughts of this, the board has been discussing this for 6 or 7 years. We've kicked this can around all over the place. And
well, we really haven't. We have kicked the can around, and every time somebody wanted to kick it out of the merger chute, this was more or less stifled. The merger chute, you go.
I'm talking about the board has been discussing this for 6 or 7 years, okay? I know that because when I first came on the board, it was one of the first things that was discussed. And I'm not saying right, wrong, or in between. The basic thoughts were there. I can only date back, and I sent this to you all, was the RFP that was sent out. It finally was decided and voted on by the board, the entire board, that we would go out with the idea of because of financial issues and a number of other issues, recruitment and everything down the line, problems that we were having in the hospital. And see if there were people who, in fact, were interested in the acquisition or a merger, quote, whatever it is, knowing full well that as an HAD that was going to be an issue. But we really felt strongly, and again, this was by vote of the board, that we need to look at something. So the RFPs went out, and really there were only two inquiries that were returned. One was from St. Joe's, and one was from Eastern Maine. I sent you the copy of, which I thought was a very excellent letter by Michelle Hood, which talked about stuff that we were already doing together, you know, the idea of clinical integration, positives, negatives, et cetera, et cetera. And St. Joe's, I think, was certainly my first choice, and I think other board members felt the same way, but there was no way, looking at their balance sheet and what was going on there, that unfortunately we could align with St. Joe's. They at the time were laying off people in the hospital. They actually laid off 2 general surgeons, and you know, it was obviously a great concern. That's where this picture got started, and that's where the momentum then went from there. There's only one player in the entire state that was interested in ever even looking at Mayo. So that's the history of that situation.
But who's steering it? I mean, is HAD 4 the one that's sitting down at the table, or is the hospital administration sitting down with Eastern Maine saying, you will pay off this debt, or you will do this?
Well, can I speak to that for a second?
I believe it's a combination of the hospital attorney and HAD 4 administration. Okay, coupled through obviously the board making the final decisions on anything. You know, I mean, that's where everything has to really channel, Dale. I mean, no matter what anybody says, the final line always comes back to the board, okay, in terms of any major decision.
So
And
why would the board, or what was their rationale to pay off this debt?
I think Nancy...
The board did not vote on this.
Huh?
The board did not vote on this proposal for the use of the funds. It didn't.
I think they did, but again,
That
I
should
just...
be easy to find out.
I can't, yeah,
Well, I would
can't
have
quote you the
screamed.
date.
I mean, I would have.
Well, maybe, you may not have been at that meeting, Joe, I don't know, okay?
I
Well, it's
mean,
in the
that should be
minutes.
as simple.
I've seen your minutes, they're copious. So it's there.
Which meeting?
We saw the 16th minutes.
Well,
Right.
the letter is dated October 5th.
So the minutes,
So, but I would like to address your question. I've been co-chair of the board last year, till October 2017. And I thought while I'm co-chair, I would see behind the curtain. No. So what happened during my tenure, since I am a more critical voice of giving away the value this hospital has to the community, negotiations practically ceased. And they immediately restarted after I was voted out of board leadership. So that, you know, even being a co-chair, I didn't see what was going on behind the curtain. But I did hear, well, I'll let you speak
No,
too.
don't feel bad, because I'm feeling the same.
Well,
thing.
you know.
So basically what you both are telling me, sitting here.
a lot of darkness.
What I'm hearing is the board is not steering this merger.
Well,
That's
no,
awesome.
no, not at all, because why in the world would we be comfortable, well, I'm at least not comfortable with a process where 2 weeks before you're expected to vote on the final merger agreement, you're presented with the draft of the agreement. And I think this was only sent out a week prior to the meeting, because 2 weeks before that I had requested a draft, which the attorney outright denied to send to me. I still have no idea what his legal right is to do so. Maybe you have had discussions on that,
Again,
that I wasn't privy to.
let me just address what you're saying, and some of which I certainly agree with. What you're saying, Dale, is I think what I'm feeling anyway is that the legal side plus administration is basically doing the legwork, which then in fact comes to the board for approval. I think in terms of, nail down function and sitting down, I know Amanda's involved in many of those talks. I'm not involved in any basically of those talks. She as the board chair, and I can't speak for her because I don't know, but I think I probably had the same experience as you have. As vice chair, I see very little of that. What I do see is the work that comes from the
Well, I seriously,
But then again, in August, I send a letter, I want to see all this communication.
Let me
And
address.
again, I haven't seen one shred of information other than another letter yet today saying, well, you're asking for too much, and until you sit down with us, we're not giving you anything.
But again,
Well,
the
we-
letters, let me just finish, with
people
the
that ask
letters
for too
that
much
I
information
saw
too,
today
we've
that
done
were
the
sent to
same
me,
thing, so.
okay, with regard, because I think if you're requesting something, I think you should have it. But from my understanding
think
is
so
there was
too.
the letter that I saw that came back from the attorney, and again, I'm not gonna get into any kind of an argument, but the letter that I saw came back that you were offered the idea to sit down with them. There was a lapse of 35 or
That's-
36
we-
days. No, but I'm just saying.
No,
I mean,
but
we
what's
need to bring
interesting,
that
though-
stuff up.
The attorney sat next to me during the entire last board
You're
meeting.
both-
He
I
didn't say a
don't
word.
think we need to
You-
bring that
no,
up.
no,
We need
that's
to
fine.
discuss
But you're,
hospitals.
one's pro and one's con, you've both been chairs, and you both, I feel like, have admitted that you're kind of in the dark sometimes, which is kind of surprising to me,
Very.
because
Well, there's a lot that goes on, and I think they
Right, but
can't feed
this-
everything there.
this is our asset. It doesn't belong to any administrator of that hospital. They don't own so much as a paperclip. It's all belongs to the municipalities.
And that's why we have a hat. I mean, that's supposed to be looking out for everybody's best interest.
The three of us can't give away a rusty pickup truck. We are not allowed to do that. And these assets at this hospital, I don't believe are any different. For me personally, set aside whether it looks to me like they're paying down as fast as they can because a $15 million bucket of money is too hard to ignore. But I can't prove that. But set it all aside. The idea of giving this asset away for no more than a handshake and not allowing us to when we easily could do it, not allowing us to build some sort of a backstop, some sort of a firewall, whether it's ambulance service or maybe just to reconstitute this thing down the road, just seems, I can't imagine why we would do that. Now, if you came to me and said, they've guaranteed us 120 months at current operation levels, and you can keep the HAD and $5 million, I'd sign off. I'd say, okay, let's try it. Let's see how it works. But it's like they're getting both ends and all the middle part, and all we get is hope. We just hope they stay open.
My experience in business life has been when you go and make a deal, those who are in charge meet to determine what the deal's going to be, and then they hand it off to the staff to take care of it. What happened here is the staff has put together the deal and handling it through the process. And then we end up with the deal that in my humble opinion is a really bad deal for the communities. And then we end up with the argument of, and this is even in the minutes of, well, we've been doing this for 6 or 7 years now, so we can't stop. Well, of course we can. And I think that would be the wise thing to do at this point, because I think, you mentioned St. Joe's. If you called up St. Joe's today and said, well, whoever the head there is, and say, we want to keep our reserve funds, but we'll lease this hospital to you for $1 a year, and we can help you with the financing, and here's financial problems. We'll add the debt service onto the rent, and we keep our reserve funds, but we'll dedicate them to support the hospital, and if the hospital isn't viable anymore, we still have reserve funds left. We can distribute them, or we can use them for other community purposes. What do you think of that? And I wouldn't be surprised if they would say, yeah, let's look at this. Because, okay, now we're down the road very far with Eastern Maine, but what is the deal they present us?
Well, if you look at this as negotiations, I
Well,
think
who
that's kind of
negotiated
I
it?
would say
Who
there's no
negotiated
real
for us?
back and forth. There's just forth.
Exactly.
At least that's what it feels like when we look at the terms. From our point of view, though, because we don't get a vote in this, The other thing that really sticks in my craw is I don't think the citizens of Sangerville understand what they own. I personally did not know what, I knew there was a HAD4. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know that we literally owned right down to the Post-it notes over there. And so do the other, I didn't know that. I didn't know that legally, the only way that hospital can currently be dissolved is to distribute the assets. I didn't know that. I don't think the citizens of Sangerville know that. I think they have a right to know that. And I think the citizens of Dexter and Dover, we are being asked to write letters of support, and we don't really understand what we're giving up. We do in this room. But I'll bet you we are not fair representation of what's actually going on here. Now, if the citizens of Sangerville say, hey, you know what? We'll take a flyer on this deal, give it all away, and if all we get out of this is a handshake, fine, we'll do it. Then that's fine, they voted. But they have that right to do that. They're circumventing this through some legislative trick.
Well, here's the thing. So apparently you tell me, and I'm not privy to that information, there's going to be emergency legislation, maybe it was discussed last week. So they already know it's going to be emergency legislation. They already know not all communities have to agree to it. But they don't share one shred of it. Again, in August I asked for whatever is out there on this. I haven't seen one shred.
My biggest thing is,
But let me just, Dale, if I may, we know though, and I think you know, and Mike is absolutely correct. The only way that you can form a quote merger or acquisition between ourselves and any entity, I don't care where it is the charter needs to be, either the hospital gets dissolved, assets distributed, that's it, it's over, or to go into a merger situation, you have to create, which we would create, the 501 or 503 or 501c3 corporation to be able even to do the merger, and that's been known for some time. We were presented with 3 or 4 different options. Okay,
that's not the point I'm making, Rick. The point I'm making is that to get to this, if the charter requires unanimous vote of the towns, we'll take your amendment to the town.
You're articulating exactly.
No,
for whatever change you want to make.
For whatever this change, but this is not being done because it's known that there's opposition. So then you move it away from the towns. We don't know what it's going to be. Either it's a majority vote on the board, it's a qualified majority on the board, or qualified majority of the towns. But that town that now, one of the towns that now has an interest will not end up with that interest to make the decision.
Correct.
And this is what's going on, and it's shameful.
when I read the charter, you read the charter and it's very specific, and you're correct. It's all in there, what has to happen. So to me, what I don't like, or is what I question, I guess is a better word, when you have a charter that has your rules, what you need to abide by, instead of the HAD coming back to all of the towns and explaining all of this, it's almost like the administrators are creating this acquisition and telling HAD, this is what you need to do. Don't go to your town and tell them the truth. We're just going to go to the legislature and we'll amend the charter so we can do what we need to do. It's like they're circumventing everybody that owns that hospital.
The board members that are elected, the folks that voted to elect both of you, never dreamed that you would have the authority to give away an asset of this magnitude. They never, ever, in fact, I'll bet you most of them didn't even know they had the asset, much less that they were giving you the authority to give it away. And that's essentially what's being proposed here, is that if this legislative gambit works, then it will just simply take a majority, and I wouldn't even be comfortable if it had to be unanimous, because still it's just 13 people. The communities are supposed to be able to speak on this.
Well, it's 19 people. When it's a simple majority, all who have to agree are the representatives of the 4 largest of the 13 towns.
Oh, that's right, because there's
Right. So this is such a far cry from what the existing law is. So I look at that, and that really troubles me. And then I look at what I'm getting for that. I'm getting essentially no guarantees of any kind, and I'm giving up any sort of a backstop or any asset that I have. And in exchange for that, I'm gonna tip the entire system on its head.
Well, you're right, there are no guarantees, and if anyone says there are, forget it, there are no guarantees. I think the feeling of the majority of the board is based, and I've said this before, current trends in the country, what's going on in places like Millinocket, what's going on in places like Lincoln. Certainly we are headed towards corporate medicine, there's no question. Everybody is looking for that big brother so that they can in fact survive in not 2 years or 3 years or 4 years, but 5, 10, 15 years down the line. Recruitment of physicians, I mean, nurses, I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And
Yeah, but
as I said, this is, if I may just finish, this is what's thought by the representatives who in fact were elected from the towns. I agree with you, Mike. I would also tell you, from my own experience, although I had read the charter, probably not carefully enough, I probably wasn't aware, okay, of what in fact that meant, okay? But again, I think we have really researched this and looked at it carefully, and it's our best opinion that this is the best way for us to go. That's our opinion. I think anybody should be able to speak about this and discuss it. But again, this is how the board is looking at this thing, and maybe you're right. Maybe I think the board feels, it's my opinion, that they have been transparent enough in terms of and taking the best position that they possibly can. And obviously, if people are not feeling that way, maybe along those lines we should have done better.
Well, transparency is the one thing that has been lacking all along. The first two agreements are covered by a confidentiality agreement, which basically controls which information is distributed. This final agreement apparently will be under the same confidentiality agreement. I mean, to the extent I think you might have asked for a copy of this final agreement. Have you received it?
The agreement on Wednesday, is that the final agreement?
No.
Yes, that's the
No,
final
No, it's
one.
not. No, it's not.
Since when?
No, since forever. I mean, the final agreement doesn't come until next year. And I did speak to, that's the way it is, and I did speak to Craig Nelson today about how much more flexibility is left. I think some of the stuff that you brought up needs to be further discussed, this Article 7, Section 11.
Well, then the vote needs to be tabled. What are we voting on an agreement on? That's not final, not before us.
Knowing that this is a working document. In terms of confidentiality, you tell me a business that's not involved in contract negotiation, that doesn't involve confidentiality, and, well,
The town of
I've never
Sangerville.
seen one.
The town of Sangerville.
Just like the
Well,
We are not
hospital district.
allowed, we can't keep these documents
We're not
secret.
negotiating between competing parties.
That we
Now,
do.
to
If
the
we have a
final
negotiation between two competing parties, particularly if it could compromise the town's interest, we're allowed to go into executive session. But once we're down to one party, we have no cause for executive session. And I suspect that you guys fall under the exact same jurisdiction.
Did you
According to
discuss?
the attorney, and this is a question that I asked.
Whose attorney?
Okay. The board's attorney, okay? Nelson and Doyle. This is a question that I asked to make sure, because you in fact brought it up. Are we within the law? And according to him, we are in the law, and according to the Eastern Maine attorneys, we are within the law.
I'd like
With
to
regard to
check with-
confidentiality.
I'd like to check with Maine Municipal.
Is the confidentiality required, other than by agreement?
No. I would like
The
to.
answer is no, I can tell you that.
I mean, I can
You
see
don't
if
have
it's
to
two
talk Craig.
businesses, but where it's an HAD, and
Well-
it's community, it's all of us.
How
No,
does my
it's a
elected
public- It's a
official-
public entity, just like any other elected town.
How does my
The same
elected
laws apply.
representative convey information back to us if he's sworn to secrecy?
Well-
I understand if we're in a contract negotiation between two different hospitals or 5 competing hospitals, but once we've narrowed it down, and now we're actually to the nuts and bolts of how we're gonna consummate this thing, you've got to be able to communicate to the citizens you represent.
And that's exactly what I have done since the 6 years I've been on this board. This is the first time, and specifically asked today, when can that contract be released to the public? And in fact, I would say that, within a very, very short time, that's correct, because there are confidentiality.
Let me tell you when Eastern Maine consents to it. That's when, and that's
Probably
the
true.
corner
I think to some extent that's
this
correct.
board has been played into by those who drove it.
Will it be released before you vote on it?
No, can I ask one question first? Last meeting, was it in executive session?
No.
So the contract is public, end of story. The contract has been in a public meeting, it's public. So I do not know why it doesn't get shared.
And again, I spoke to the attorney today, and it's going to get shared. There may be sensitive issues. I'm not privy to that. Okay.
All right, I guess from our point of view, what are the three of us gonna do, if anything, about any of this? That's really my point of putting us all together here today, and I really appreciate you guys helping us bat this thing around.
Right.
But are we collectively, as a board, are we interested in either writing a letter to the newspaper or reaching out to these other communities and sharing with them what we've learned, our concerns? I am convinced, because I believe we have two of the most capable board members that are in this entire discussion. And look at how
The
confusing this is.
Yeah, it's
And
not a
both-
matter of right or wrong, it's confusion, it really is, it's
And-
two different.
There clearly is a lack of some communication here, even, like I said, for and against, you're both, at times have felt like you've been somewhat in the dark, and I don't wanna put words in your mouth, but I can only imagine what the other 11 communities, or 11 communities are going through. Do we wanna put ourselves in the middle of this, or not?
The only thing that I think, you're saying we're giving away this and that, I would like, and I'm not saying that you're not a professional and that you can't come to that conclusion on your own, but I would like a professional to tell us that. This is what we're giving away, or quote unquote, giving away monetarily.
They told us,
They did.
the administration told us on
What are you
Wednesday.
saying?
We said
But-
we had so much in assets. I don't think we felt that we're.
Yeah, because when
we're
you're
giving
reading-
away, but we're all, excuse me,
Yeah.
we're giving away, but we're also receiving in terms of, with no guarantee, a backup with which 8 other or 9 other institutions have already gone through and never had a problem. We're backing up something in terms of sustainability that will in fact ensure that theoretically ensure that the hospital would be here 20 years from now.
But at the end of the day, we're giving up $28 million in assets, is what she told us. In-
Yeah, she
in
did.
excess of.
And I
But we
really,
had
honestly,
the
I felt like
assets-
she was.
But we had the
shooting low.
asset stale of every 2 weeks when we have to come up with $1 million, okay, for
No, no,
payroll.
no, I understand
okay,
all of that.
Those are assets, as far as I'm
We
concerned.
have been nowhere ever near having a problem to meet payroll. We don't have
I
these.
believe twice last year we in fact did, and
No,
had
well,
to draw on money market.
Yeah, okay, but there was no problem to meet payroll. I mean, it's okay, a delayed payment comes in. When you run a business, that's what you got an operating line for.
They've never levied a tax
We-
in
we
45
have-
years.
We actually, last year, Dancy announced she was going to draw on the money market line just to test it or use it for a little while. We have still, I think, $2 or $3 million in money market accounts. I mean, we never were against the wall. Of course, it can change over time. We all know that it's a changing environment. Healthcare is a challenging industry, but it's just as challenging for Eastern Maine as it is for us.
Right.
And Eastern Maine, when Eastern Maine controls everything around us, if we end up not going there, we might be an interesting alternative for those who do not wish to be in that sort of a system as providers.
Gerald, I'm very curious to hear this, and you're a smart guy. Would you question the fact and the mission statement of Eastern Maine saying we really want to ensure through a large conglomerate, excellent health care and access in northern Maine. Do you think, I mean, are they lying to us about something?
But here's the fundamental problem with Eastern Maine, and I don't, you know, I never was against if the board and the administration think they can't run a hospital, you know, with an unlimited backstop by raising funds through taxes. Well, give it away, but then don't give away the reserve funds. This has been my contention all along. Now, what Eastern Maine's, you know how many corporations I've seen come and go, how many stocks of mine became worthless? I mean, they are rated by one agency at the lowest end of...
I understand.
No, but now
But
let
do you
me,
think they're
now
gonna
let
go
me
away?
speak.
Yeah.
At the lowest end of the investment grade scale with a negative outlook for the second year in a row. They're rated by Moody's at the highest junk bond level. Now, the rating agency grading is a correlation to the expected illiquidity of this outfit, or the ability to pay to actually satisfy these bonds. I think that's a more accurate representation of what that represents, right? And now they came last week and they said, well, our 2-year plan is to maybe get them to, in 2 years, notch it from the negative outlook either to a positive outlook. I mean, the problem Eastern Maine has with all its intentions is fundamentally structural, and they haven't been able to address it. There's nothing that stops us from saying, even if this is still the best alternative in the view of the board, to say, you know what, we'll come and talk to you in 3 or 4 years and see if you turn yourself around. And then the counter argument is, I mean, I don't even know what to say to that is, well, this is the last time they're taking anybody on, and then I think I'd say, well, okay, too bad, you know. I just think it's, we as board members, if we vote something like this in, we are absconding our fiduciary duty. We are just utterly violating it, because we are voting into something that's worse than what we got.
But you didn't, it just, my question was, do you think their motive, okay, and that's something that I have to think about. I am not the greatest Eastern Maine fan.
I don't assign emotions to corporations, I'm sorry.
But I think they're more than, they deliver 40% plus of the health care in northern Maine. I have to believe, okay, that they are, and looking at their charitable organization, their governance, their structure, et cetera, I have to believe, otherwise I certainly wouldn't be for any of this, that their intention is in fact to improve the health care in our region. The idea of putting together a full unit of health care in Piscataquis County and a junction now between Greenville and ourselves to create a tremendous delivery system, okay? I gotta believe that that's a positive intention, and I gotta believe that it can only be helpful for the hospital, and I gotta believe, no, that the hub and spoke model in that setting can only work for us. Greenville is going to end up sadly, I think, and I think they'll accept us, as just kind of a first aid station. Mayo is going to benefit from an affiliation like this by anything that's drifting south is going to Mayo Regional. And I'm looking at it that way. That is, for me, the sustainability that I'm looking at. I hear what you're saying. I don't like it giving away anything. Maybe, but that's not the issue here. The issue is, what does it take for us, and weighing risk against benefits, what does it take for us to give our best bet for the hospital to be here 20 years from now? That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, then I'll tell you what I think the best solution is. The best solution is to retain these reserve funds, to find a way of dealing with Eastern Maine that keeps these funds in the community. We dedicate these funds to supporting Eastern Maine. I've been saying this for a year and a half now. I've been arguing this up and down, but I'll say it again. And then we have those funds. If Eastern Maine and his...
You're talking about board designated funds?
The $16 million now, they should stay. They should be under the control of the communities. They can be dedicated for capital investment. It's just the same as if Eastern Maine had the funds, but they won't because they have to pay down the debt. And even if you give the hospital away, you know, and I just write one thing into the deed or a $1 a year lease, and that would say, In case you go bankrupt, or in case you're taken over, we can claw this baby back. And then the communities actually have sustainable health care. What this is just hoping that Eastern Maine will not, or will be able to be successful in what it's endeavoring to do.
Have you,
Because in 30 years, I'm willing to bet with you, both of us won't be here.
I won't be here, maybe.
Yeah,
but
but I'm willing to bet whether there will be no Eastern Maine Health System or Northern Light or whatever it's gonna be called in 3 years when.
Somebody will own it.
I really think the core of this hospital is the reserve fund. And if this reserve fund were to be kept in the communities, and nobody can tell me, you cannot sit down, two adults cannot sit down and negotiate even with Eastern Maine and say, this is the deal we're willing to make. You wanna take it or leave it, and then if the answer is, and this is what Craig Nelson told me in May after the board meeting, he said, well, Eastern Maine won't take us without the reserve funds. But now the proposal is to pay them to blow
to
them
burn
away.
up.
No.
This doesn't add up.
I would sign that.
You haven't seen the
I don't know
memorandum,
you.
that quote $15 million now. You haven't seen the negotiations that have in fact occurred
Well,
with regard to
I wish they would be shared with me as a board member, but I guess
Well, you gotta go to meetings.
I have
to make that.
an information request out for 2 months now.
That number
This
has
is-
been brought down, and
But
here's the
this is
memorandum.
absurd. This has not been approved. Craig Nelson sent a letter to George Eaton saying, we will pay down these funds and do this and that, and we'll give you $4 million. The board never approved this action by the attorney.
But that's my point.
Have
is
you
I
approved
did
it?
speak, but I did speak to Craig Nelson today.
They're just
and
spending down
they
the bucket
are-
of money. They
they-
just want that bucket of money to be as small as they can get it.
Well,
Why
this-
would
you know,
why would Mayo propose to spend
Well, that
$2
has to
million?
do with, first of all, the building itself.
Well, let's not get lost in details here, but here's the point. If Mayo pays down $7 million in debt, all that happens is the balance sheet
Correct.
shrinks by $7 million, the net assets are still 28.
Correct.
Right, there's no,
Exactly
there's no
right.
benefit.
This is a shell
But-
game, but to the detriment of the institution, because it is the cash, the interest on the cash that can pay off the debt.
Right.
And that cash will be gone for future debt. So-
If Mayo would agree to the terms that Gerald just described, that those funds would be used for them as capital improvements, the HAD structure would still exist, which is really valuable to the communities, because essentially, as long as that framework is there, we can do this for as long as we have a stomach for it.
But here's one more item to this. If the HAD structure, don't think I didn't bring all this up. If the HAD structure continued, right, and Eastern Maine just has a lease, a long-term lease that we cannot break on our end, but can only be broken if they go bankrupt or taken over. We can go and we can raise the funds to improve and maintain the hospital.
Right.
Through taxation.
Not through taxation, through the bond bank at the lowest possible interest rate.
Because they don't have the credit rating necessary to
And
do that.
it doesn't show up on their balance sheet. You know, they go to Chinbro and have them build the
So
building
would
for
you
them and
support
lease
that
it.
if they would do it?
I'm sorry.
Would you support an arrangement like that if Eastern Maine would agree to it?
Again, I'm not privy to what has been discussed.
Well,
No, I'm not,
imagine-
I'm just saying hypothetically.
No, we are running the show. It's not
That's correct.
administration.
That's-
It's not, we are running the show. Would you go out with a deal like that?
Again, I have to look at.
It's a better deal than what we're being offered.
It's a much better deal.
But again, I think in dealing with Eastern Maine, I mean, they have their set reasons for doing what they're doing.
Well, they wanted-
And again, since they're the only kind of player in town, I guess I don't know.
What about, I mean, the thought process of going to St. Joe's, if you went to St. Joe's and said, hey, we got a debt-free hospital, and you don't think they would step back in?
My understanding is, and
I mean,
again,
that was
I don't
your-
know, I think
I
we're
mean-
guessing, but my understanding is they are having enough trouble, they're with Covenant, and I guess they are having enough financial troubles that I don't think they would consider it, to be honest with you. That's my guess, Dale, I don't know that for sure. Okay, I don't know that
Well,
for sure.
we have never seen, you mentioned before we saw their balance sheet, we've never seen their balance sheet. And at the last meeting, has Eastern Maine told you folks where they are with their financials for this year?
I think Marie and I imagine the attorney has in fact seen that. I have not
Why
seen
haven't
that.
we seen this?
Okay.
We are asked to sign off
Eventually,
on Wednesday.
I really, I guess that's my big concern right now. Listening to both of you, I know you don't fully agree about different things, but there's one key element.
But
You
I
both-
think personally, we
you
get
both
along
keep
well, we
saying-
just
Oh,
disagree.
No, but I mean, you're both
absolutely-
agreeing to-
This is
Yeah.
nothing personal.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel the same way about you as you do about me. That's nothing personal. We have a disagreement about what the future looks like in medicine, okay? And as I said, I've been in it a long time, he's been in business a long time. We come from two absolutely similar but different backgrounds. Again, I don't see this happening.
But I studied the business of
disagree.
medicine.
No, but I'm saying, I'm looking around the country and seeing every other small hospital doing exactly what we are, or what is intended to be done with a larger organization. And we're in the unfortunate situation that there's only one player in town. And if this doesn't go through,
No, there's
it'll
two.
never happen again.
Why
Right,
would it
yeah, I
not?
don't understand
No,
that either.
I think
don't
that's
understand
completely.
that.
It seems disingenuous.
We have
When you put
ourselves.
out an
Not on your part,
RFP,
on their part. It
when you
seems
put out an
disingenuous.
RFP and you get two responses.
Right, but
So
it
what?
doesn't mean that 2 years from now, that.
Medicine, trust me, is not getting any better. We're getting more problems with less
Which
revenue.
only helps us, because we are stable. We have something they don't have.
Yeah, and most of the rural hospitals, the argument is almost the rural hospitals are shutting down. We have a tax base. If we really need to go out to communities and say, if you want this hospital that provides services beyond the scope of what a hospital like this would provide, if you want to have this as an asset in your community in the long run, well, can we get your help for a little bit? And this help is not that extreme. I mean,
I
If you
think
went out to the
this,
citizens of Sangerville tomorrow and asked them about raising their taxes, or in Milo, where you've got a mill rate of 34, trust me, I'm gonna tell you, I've lived here long enough to tell you, people are not going for more taxes. They're looking for less taxes, under any
We buy a new
circumstance.
fire truck.
Huh?
Yes, I'm
What's
saying,
the
Corinna just bought a $500,000 truck, they did it on a whim. They probably needed it.
But I don't even know, again, we
But-
talk about mill rates being so different.
I beg to differ on that one, because I mean,
But
obviously.
$1 million
I've-
is the mill, I mean,
I've
it's
been-
doable.
Yeah, I've been discussing my view of things, obviously, with people, and I have
But
really
you've got a mill rate of 12. Milo's got a mill rate of 34.
You think that
Bradford
people-
has a mill rate of
Do
25.
you think the people I know stop at the town line of Sebec? I mean, I've been talking to people all over.
I think the tax situation is a very
Can I now
serious
speak?
situation.
But
I'm sorry,
yeah.
I'm sorry,
it
sir.
still is up to the municipalities.
Right.
They get to decide. Milo gets to decide. In fact, I bet when Milo finds out what they're giving up in order to enter into this hope, they're gonna really be reluctant, because they probably could use that money. So, and it's their choice. And this is the part that really keeps coming back at me. This board doesn't get to go to Augusta and change the rules and cut my citizens out of it.
But you're
But they
talking
do,
about
that's
getting
the
the money.
problem.
That's what they're gonna try to
Getting
do.
the money
Right.
on dissolving the HAD you're talking about.
It's their choice. If those communities decide to do it, they decide to do it.
What do you do after you dissolve the HAD?
It sounds like we're gonna dissolve it anyway.
It's gonna be gone, just, it's gonna be gone. I mean,
We're not gonna have, if you have this merger, the HAD is dissolved.
Correct.
Except for, the difference is Eastern Maine is gonna hold all the assets, or the towns will hold the assets. But I mean, I'm not, to me, the process is what I have. the
But
biggest
Eastern Maine is
problem.
the backstop. That is part of the issue in
You
terms
said
of-
something the other night, and I really thought about it, and you said it again tonight. And my concern is this hub and spoke theory, okay?
For our county.
Yep, so when you talk about that, and then we look at CA Dean for what they were to what they are now. Now they're not much more than a first aid. And so they've taken that hospital, they've downgraded it down to a first aid, and they can transport every patient to Eastern Maine. Life Flight, as we know, we heard multiple runs today. It's very easy to get any patient from Greenville to Bangor at a whim. They don't need, the only thing they need Mayo for, in my opinion, is they need the level of patience. They don't need the service. I believe that they could take Mayo and turn it into maybe a higher level of a first aid station, but still not level of a trauma facility or surgical or anything else that it is now. I think they could downgrade that hospital a lot and still do the same thing. A step above first aid, because we're that much closer to Bangor than Greenville is.
I think you're absolutely right, Dale, but my point that I'm trying to make in looking at this whole process is how do we maintain what we have, okay? What I don't want to see is us lose services. What I don't want to see is us having to lay off full-time employees. What I'm saying is that situation, because right now, how their referral pattern perhaps works is they do bypass Mayo, okay, because they're in the system and we're not in the system. So your general surgery, your orthopedic surgery, right down the
So
road.
is this how compassionate medicine, or whatever you call the motto, is being done?
But I'm saying,
At least the
my
main-
prediction is, you know, again, I've been on all their medical staffs, okay, whether it was Greenville, or whether it was Millinocket, or Lincoln, or, I know how referral patterns work, and especially with the Eastern Maine, or the Northern Lights, whatever it's called now, works. If you put Mayo in the system, okay, those cases are now going to Mayo. And if you read the letter from Michelle Hood, this idea of keeping patients in a community, I think is a big thing. Okay, not only is it a question of filling beds. The study that it was done, that if you really can't maintain 15 patients within your hospital in terms of your daily census, you're not going to survive. We have only 13. I think between a potential affiliation and, in fact, what goes on from transfer to Greenville, we can easily make that number. And again, guarantee us more viability in terms of what that hospital is about. I'm looking perhaps more at the clinical picture, okay, and trying to also figure in the economic picture. And that's how I see this thing. I mean, this is where we're going.
So here's a question with regard to saying, to have a real negotiation with sitting down in Eastern Maine and saying, are you going to guarantee that we have 3 surgeons at Mayo? Will you guarantee that we have 2 orthopedic surgeons at Mayo? Then it's a deal. Then you say, oh, okay, but we have no guarantee of what they're planning to do with that hospital. We're trusting that they want to keep services at Mayo, but have we said we want to guarantee that there'll be 3 full-time surgeons at Mayo?
I don't think we've asked that, but I think we have already seen over the last 6 months, because it's something I've worked on, and because of general surgery, is we need 1.5 general surgeons in Dover.
But we used to have 3. We used to have 3.
Yeah, but we used to do vascular,
Right.
thoracic.
But the point is why
aneurysms.
can't we say we're giving, or whatever?
I don't think they can guarantee that.
Well,
Okay,
why
but
not?
I think they can.
But
don't
have
want
you
to.
asked? Have we
Well,
asked?
but what my concern is they're not gonna guarantee that because they don't have to. Because we are 20 minutes closer than Greenville to Eastern Maine. They don't need a surgeon in Dover because they're gonna be able to transport to Eastern Maine and provide the same service.
So that's the, you know, the feeling I get is that everyone is telling us that we don't have any ability to negotiate with them what we want.
Well, I think if you send weak negotiators, that's how you end up.
Yeah, there you go.
And certainly while I was on the board, there was talk, but there was never talk of, let's go and meet as the owners. You know, the
Well,
executive
but
committee
that's-
of the board,
That's the problem.
you have
is
the owner
that's
represent,
not-
let's meet with the other side that sits down. I mean,
Yeah.
these are things you can negotiate in 3 1-hour sessions a month apart each, because you start and you go back and you see what worked with it.
Yeah.
And this has never happened. Now, when this process started, at least when it started to go down the one road with Eastern Maine, I proposed to the board that the board itself retain either consultant or counsel to guide it through the process. So somebody was brought in who actually didn't make very bad comments, and among them was, don't underestimate what you cannot negotiate. But because administration thought that this would be insulting that the board has its own representation. This whole thing was just killed.
I think it's
And-
very wrong to have
and-
their
and-
administration.
and to
negotiate this.
To me, in a process like this, the board can and most likely does have a different motivation and goal than the administration.
Well, of course.
And this is natural, this is business.
Sure.
And this is life. And I thought this was a good thing to do. Now, it just got squashed. And it's a shame, because I think we would probably be in a different situation, maybe even be in a situation where I would say, that makes sense. But what we have now, in my opinion, is just hands up, here it is all, and I hope you're gonna help us. And I really think Mayo does not need to do this. It's not within, even if it doesn't raise taxes, and if I take the last 7 years as a prediction for the future, or even the worst 2 years, within 10 years won't be there. That it even needs to either ask for tax money or has to submit to somebody else.
But with that said, and you're saying as a standalone, Mayo as a
Yeah,
standalone.
as a standalone, yeah.
However, with regard to recruitment, so I'm not talking about any money, with the
Yeah.
with regard to recruitment, it's become impossible to recruit healthcare providers.
Well, I personally just watch what's going on, and Rick would know more there, but we always have gone, at least the last 7 years I've been on the board, and he will know before then, there's always been phases where it's good, where it's bad, and sometimes it's a crisis, sometimes we're almost staffed up now. I don't think we're missing really much for providers. So I think this goes in cycles, but I think I said this before, when you think of a large, almost monopolistic system out there that will then tell its employees how it's being done, because they're the only game in town. If we have that next to us, I think there will always be people who will look at it for an alternative. And this may even be to our advantage if we were a standalone. I'm not arguing we should be, but this may even be to our advantage. I don't think it's that this affiliation merger solves all the problems, because Eastern Maine has just as many problems as everybody else, recruiting providers on the physician level, on the nursing level. I think this is a systemic problem, and
that, when I think about it, and when we had the meeting the other night, and we're talking about all the finances, and not all of it I understand, but I sat here and all of a sudden I said, no matter what, we need the healthcare providers, and we can't recruit the healthcare providers because of call, because a physician's not willing to come here if they're the 1.5 surgeon and be on call 6 nights a week. Sorry, so we don't have the surgery anyway.
Well, what can I tell you? I'm a country bumpkin lawyer, and I work all hours, and there are people who want to do that, and people who don't. Like Rick did it from all his life.
Years and years and years and years, and never got paid to take calls.
Yeah, but the point is, there's still people like that out there.
I just met with Dr.
just-
Daggett up in Milo, Maine, of all places.
Right.
And I mean,
Yeah, but he
this
doesn't
young
take
man is
calls.
brilliant,
He
isn't
doesn't
he?
take calls.
Fortunate to have him.
I mean, but who would have thought he would pick Milo, Maine? But he
You know
did.
what,
Yes.
Mike, and I'm not
Yes,
saying
and who
anything
would've
in
thought we would've
bragging.
come to do
When
it?
I
That's
left, when I left
Big
New
time.
York City as
That's right.
chairman of a
right.
department, people said,
What
where
are
is your
you, nuts?
psychiatrist?
That's right. No.
What are you, nuts?
Hey,
I think this just came from him.
Yeah, right, exactly.
My office has 22 other folks doing exactly what I do, and most of them think I'm crazy for listening
Right.
to. So
No,
this
no,
speaks to
no,
Gerald's
there-
point.
There's
There
no
are some
question.
people.
There are people, but
They
I
are
can
getting less and
guarantee you
less and
that the
less.
younger group of healthcare providers will not work and take call for free.
And I'll accept all of that. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be good negotiators.
No,
That
I
doesn't
agree
mean we
that.
should
I
give
agree
away
that.
all of our
Right,
designated
right,
funds.
right.
That doesn't mean that we should, to move this legislation through some sort of trickery. All of those things, I think we can agree on. This thing should be negotiated, hard-nosed negotiated. We do this all the time, and I say,
How long did it take us to get rid of the Aggie Fowler?
treat the asset like it's
seriously.
your own personal
I mean,
asset.
Right.
Absolutely.
I
What's
mean,
the
people
value
all
of
the
that?
time wanna say, well, just go pull that gate out. Well, no.
No, right.
No, I don't
right.
want to have so if this were our hospital, if this,
It
we
is
were
our
the three of
hospital.
us, it
Oh,
is,
yeah,
you're
yeah.
right. But if the three of us were in charge of negotiating this deal, we would never have given up the reins to our administrators to do that, ever.
I think in listening to this, okay, and again, you should always have your input, just as Gerald or me. But what you're saying is, at the level of negotiation, there has been poor negotiation, and in fact, it has not come through the board. That's what I'm understanding right now.
It has not been driven by the board. The board never said, go out and negotiate this for us.
But what I'm saying, so the key is how do we come upon a solution, okay, that works?
Stop.
Where
Yeah.
now is the only thing you can
Finally
do.
there.
The board is the power. No different, it's up to you guys to do that. That's why we have a board. It's,
Well,
the administrators are not even supposed to be
And
doing
again,
it.
this is not a final contract. What I'm saying is.
This is really a blatant misrepresentation. We are being
Well-
presented with a final merger agreement, which we cannot share even the title of apparently, which to me makes absolutely no sense. And this is what it says, and we are voting on it, and it will be signed. This is not the final vote. If we don't want to have a final vote, we table the vote. We don't need to vote the same contract 3 times.
I don't think the board members know, A, their responsibility or their power. I don't think they understand it.
And
I think they do to some extent. What I'm trying to get at is, it sounds to me like the administration perhaps needs more of the input that you guys are talking about right now. And that means.
Actually, you are.
But I think coming from the people who are rolling up their sleeves and sitting in your seats representing the public, okay, really should be sitting down with Marie and the attorney in a forum, or a letter going back stating exactly what you're saying right now about
We
negotiating.
So
tried that
here we are.
last week, and I didn't really get that much of a warm feeling how that went.
Receptive?
Yeah.
It wasn't
There was
warm.
no receptive.
I addressed that.
Yeah, that was not-
And
that was- I
I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, I
There's
agree
no
with
question.
So we're at a point now where we're in the final chapters of this thing.
Yeah.
What are we gonna do, if anything? Are we going to just let this train continue down the track? We've done our part, we've had our public meeting, or are we going to engage? Are we going to consider writing some letters, making some phone calls, holding bigger meetings? I believe that if we inform just the Sangerville folks of what's really happening, I think you're gonna find there's some interest. Based on what we know.
This is my fear. 5 years from now, let's say that we're all wrong, and Eastern Maine folds, or Eastern Maine decides to close that hospital.
well, I wouldn't be so
And then-
wrong.
I think statistically, it's certainly a consideration.
Sure.
Yeah, it's a possibility, that's for sure.
And then somebody's gonna go back and say, why did you guys give all that away? Why didn't you hold that reserve just in case? You had the power to bring that hospital back and put it on its
Well,
feet.
guess what? It falls, unfortunately, more on my shoulders than it does yours. You are obviously.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. I mean, you're supposed to represent us as a community.
The
So that's
folks in
why
Dexter are gonna be able to say, we had no idea. Our reps came in and told us to sign this.
Well, but they can still rescind the support letter, I mean, if they choose to. do
Right,
so.
but-
They're just
but we know.
matters to be presented at
The three of us
hearing.
know. This is from your 10-16 minutes. This really jumped out at me. Dr. Cabot asked, could the system close the hospital? You're talking to the Eastern Maine Health Center attorney.
And.
George is his name.
Right.
George.
He started by saying, you can never say never.
Yeah,
That's not reassuring at this phase of the process. That
And
seems
I
rather
expected
glib.
that exact thing coming back, because again, how does anyone really know?
But
The
you-
reason I wanted it was, I just wanted it on the record. I asked questions.
Well, I
I'm
think he
sure-
gave you an honest answer.
Right,
Yeah.
you're right, but I'm sure there are questions that I asked that people were not happy about, because I think they are important issues, and you can't sweep them under the rug.
Right, so therefore, our reluctance is very justified. You never can say never.
I agree.
If his response to you is, I can't imagine in 1,000 years that we would close that place, I would have felt better.
And again, my opinion, and it is only my opinion, looking at the track record, et cetera, and again, not going through the whole spiel, I don't think Eastern Maine is closing.
I don't think
I
they
think it has anything to
will.
do
The
with
question is, will they
operating
close that?
anything else.
But my thing about Eastern Maine is I understand it's 40% of the healthcare in Northern Maine, but it's a business. It doesn't matter what the business is. It is a
He's
business.
correct.
And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what service they provide. They owe money, they have to pay money, and when that money is out, they're done. Whether or not we want it to happen or we think it can happen, it will happen.
Somebody stronger will buy them.
I even heard the argument it's too big to fail.
That, we heard that.
As I said, delivery of healthcare is a business. It has become a business. At one time, it was not a business. It actually was dealing with patients.
Correct.
It is now a business, and it is a different business, and it is run in a different way with different backups. Certainly, in an area, where whether the state has to come in or based on now all of a sudden you don't have any delivery. If you did not have delivery of health care in Northern Maine, do you think the federal government or the state government's going to be able to sit there?
I heard there's, in this, I don't know this to be fact, and I was supposed to have an answer by today, and I did not get it. But I was told today that there is a major employer in this town, and their health care is not usable at Eastern Maine. So when they get referred, they have to go to Boston.
Who's this now?
I heard that's what Hardwoods is.
Yeah, Hardwood's in, I think, and again,
And I don't know that to be factual, so I don't wanna,
Right.
but, so what, okay, let's just flip this
Well,
around.
Hardwood also, and again, I don't know the full details. My understanding is that Hardwood, and I'm a big fan of Hardwood, was involved in a cancer case where that patient ended up going to Eastern Maine. There was a question with regard to Cobra, and Cobra came back and made them pay, in this case, $100,000. My understanding is that the relationship between Hardwood Products and Eastern Maine is a very, very difficult, not good situation. So where the politics end up in there,
Sure.
I have no idea. I don't really care. As I said, my bottom line is, what can I do the best for the people of our community to hopefully assure we all of us, I'm in this as much as you are going to get the best care, accessibility, so when you pick up a phone you can actually talk to a doctor, and in addition, be here and be able to get our care in our local community if in fact we want to decide.
You have
what I'm
one of the
looking at.
top 5 employers in our community that is not gonna have any healthcare service with this merger. If they can't go to Eastern Maine, this is now gonna be an affiliate of Eastern Maine. If their health insurance isn't gonna be usable at Mayo, where are they gonna go?
I think it will be, I think
They
But
can't
it's
go
it's
to-
all,
I think our
They can't go
administration, you know what, Dale, it's a great point,
I mean-
and I think it's a very important point.
That's why
we need a
but I
lot
think-
of questions.
I don't wanna
But
go
I
into
think-
any details or anything, but if
Yeah.
there is a major employer in our area that cannot get
That's-
services at Eastern Maine,
I believe that
That's
though
bad.
we are in talks all the time with Hardwood Products on a reasonable level, as far as I'm concerned. Even the mill out in
but what Mayo is allowed,
Was
what
an
Mayo
issue.
is and what they are 2 different conversations. Once you merge, you're now them. Whatever Mayo has now for acceptance of insurance level is no longer gonna be with the merger. I would assume, I would guarantee you're gonna be under their umbrella. Whatever their rules are, is what your rules are gonna be now.
Well, since it's
And
corporate
that's something-
structure.
yeah.
It's a corporate structure.
So would you assume prices to go down or up?
I would hope, I mean, theoretically, you would hope they would go down. Statistically,
If you reduce
I don't think
competition.
you're ever gonna see prices go
So
down
if-
anywhere in the
if-
country, I don't care what they do.
Well, if Eastern Maine is struggling, its goal will be to raise cash. And you raise cash by finding just the price point, at least that's economic theory, where you generate the most money.
But they're also in a
And-
position, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
And And given what Mayo charges, because sometimes our charges are higher, sometimes lower, but I think on average they're lower than it would be.
No. This
It
has
would be
been,
the Eastern
for
Maine
me, this has
system.
been a bugaboo, which has bothered me. I've gotten more calls from patients, okay? How come I can get at Eastern Maine or at St. Joe's my colonoscopy for $1,200 and I get a bill from Mayo for $4,000? Because it becomes equity based on scale. And the more stuff you're doing, I mean, it's very simple in business, obviously you know more about it than I do, but it's a basic concept that, you know, the more you buy, the more you do, the cheaper things can get. As I said, it's something that we've also had issues
So the
even with our laboratory.
So the colonoscopies will take place in Bangor then?
No,
So
no,
how
I
do you
think
increase the scale in Dover?
we can improve on our pricing, okay? Because we can be buying better, we can be using smarter, we can have more input on how to make our system work better. But these are things that really need to be addressed in our area.
Well-
It goes beyond the affiliation, okay?
There's one thing I do not believe, and that is that the people who run and work in this hospital don't have the wits to do that right now. I really think they are hardworking people, they try. It sounds polemic now, but I really think they all do, and as much as I disagree with the leadership of the hospital, yeah, as far as the operations go, they try to do the right thing. I agree with them on this merger goings on, but as far as just running the hospital day to day and trying to retain people, find people, make it a place that people like to work, and I think they're doing a great job. I really don't think any different.
So you brought up something, and when your example, I would look at that completely opposite. If I was Mayo, if I was Eastern Maine, and I knew I could provide a service in Bangor at $1,200, and I know it's costing $4,000.
I just made up those,
No, I
those
understand.
numbers are kind of
But,
in
no,
the
yes,
ballpark.
I know, but if I can provide it that much cheaper in Bangor, and it costs me that much to provide it in Mayo, that's probably a service that I'm gonna cut. Because I can absorb that in Bangor, and I can do it way cheaper.
But here's the problem, Dale. You can't get a bed in Bangor. You can't get a procedure scheduled for 6 months. Their idea, okay, in all of this process, from what I understand, is to bring things back into the community, utilize the beds that are there, utilize
the
the
hope.
minor structure.
So is that-
Right, but again, that's been.
Is that in
Whether you
writing?
go to
Is that
Blue
in
Hill,
writing?
whether you go to Blue Hill, or you go
Right.
to a place like
But-
Ellsworth,
What about,
I think that's what they're doing.
But
What about Sebasticook? Is their service level maintained since they merged?
No, I think they lowered.
Again, I don't know for sure, but I
That's
think
all
it's
stuff
probably
we need to
been, it's
know.
been more stable than it was before.
Right, but I mean, as far as the level of services provided at Sebasticook,
The scope.
is it equal
I think
level
it's
of
about, I
hospital?
think it's about the same. I think they had, again, these critical access hospitals are rated, as my recollection now, is like on an A, B, C, D, E level. So if you're at A, you'd be like Greenville, providing just basic services. You take the next step up from there, they might do some minor general surgery or some minor surgery. You get to C and D. My understanding as I last looked at this thing, Mayo was kind of in the C-D relationship, so we were in the higher portion. Again, I think, which makes us obviously more attractive in the situation, and again, makes us work even better in the hub and spoke with regard to a place like Greenville.
But what's there to say that Mayo doesn't become the spoke of Bangor being the hub? I mean,
Again, there is absolutely no guarantee, but according to their plan, okay, of action in terms of looking at what they want to do, and again, I'm taking this on faith.
well, I mean,
and
I
making
want to
sense,
see it
and
in
making
writing.
sense, and trying to make sense of this thing, that's exactly the opposite of what they want to do, okay? If they're true to their word, and I have sat with many administrators, this Michelle Hood knows about rural medicine, okay? And I think she truly is telling the truth about bringing stuff back into, and not stealing like they used to do from.
But
the
how do
critical
we
access
hold them
hospital.
accountable? Where is our,
I don't know.
My bigger fear with corporate America nowadays
You keep
is
the cash.
nobody at that
Yeah,
level
yeah.
stays.
Keep the cash.
The whole
This
upper
thing
level is always
has
rotating.
not been negotiated well.
is that,
It just doesn't feel like it has been.
It hasn't been negotiated.
It hasn't really been negotiated at all.
Then I think you need to put your feelings in writing.
I
think
agree.
that- and
I'm
think
not
that
saying
would be
I'm
helpful.
against the merger, I guess I mean, that's not what my voice is maybe this is the best
And
deal.
Gerald, you're
Maybe-
not saying that either. I'm sorry, Dale, I
Yeah.
didn't mean to interrupt. I'm sorry. You're not saying,
Well, I'm saying,
except that,
do it with brain.
right,
Yes,
right,
I guess that would be,
And,
right.
and,
Do it
and,
like a good businessman.
yeah, and hey, have a safety line. We can have the safety line. You know, now things might be in a rut, but in a year or two, I mean, there's nothing that says the world comes to an end if we don't rush to the legislature in the 1st of December and file a bill and blah, blah, blah. But we can do this next year. And maybe that'd be a better negotiation, because Eastern Maine has a struggle plan for the next 2 years, and they admitted this, at least based on the minutes at the last meeting. So there's nothing that's going to change that much, because what are they gonna do? So now we have all we have, and we're not taking it, no. They will talk to, I don't know if Lincoln has talked with them or not, I mean, there are other hospitals out there that would fit into their vision, let's call it.
I think, again,
And-
from what I
and
hear,
this-
Lincoln has talked to them.
Yeah, but this idea that we're up against the wall, down the road of no return, we're not at all. You know, I for myself and for my community will insist on this information that I requested to be provided to me. And I've been, I think, very careful to voice this opinion internally until now. I will now have no option but to go out and enforce my rights to this information. I will do that. But I will also, in the same step, enforce the town's rights to its assets. And I will stake this claim to just make sure, in case on Wednesday there still is a vote on the final agreement, that the rights of my community are preserved.
That seems reasonable.
I've reviewed this with the selectmen of my town, and that's the way I will proceed.
In some ways, I feel, and this is very simplistic, like the wedding invitations have been sent out and we're all sitting here saying, oh my God, we gotta go through
The
with this
bride's
wedding.
going, I can't do it.
That's right.
You have to, we paid for
Yeah, and that's exactly right.
When I-
And
It's already here.
that's very simplistic, but that's.
But everybody can relate to that.
Right, you know, that, whoa, we can
Put the
say
brakes on
we
it.
need to
We need time.
back up. I may still
I just
marry that
don't- I just
person,
don't think
but
I was
not
looking
on
out for the best
Wednesday.
interest for
Not
any
on
of-
Wednesday.
We need to be sure that it is, and I'm
Right.
not sure that it is. I don't
I'm
think.
not
Well,
saying the concept or the thought process,
I agree with you.
everything is right.
I just
But
feel.
there's no reserves
yeah,
for the
that
community.
We haven't negotiated on our side for what we have to bring into this marriage. You know, we're bringing a lot into this marriage, yet we're not getting, we haven't negotiated well.
No, I feel like the board has been kind of shackled. The role of the entire board, I think the administration is kind of, I feel like they've kind of ride roughshod over it.
And I do feel that one of the issues with the HAD is that there are board members who are lovely people, but perhaps don't have the business savvy, or so the administration has, for lack of better words, hijacked the board because they could.
Correct.
You know, that's not perhaps going to happen to some board members, but the majority of board members are nice community members that got voted to be on the HAD4 board. And that worked for a good long time. But now we need people, professionals who know what this negotiation is all about on that board, and they're not there. And
Well, but the board could hire a consultant, right?
Yes,
But again,
yes,
this
yes.
has been stymied. Now, here's one example, if just maybe a 3 or 4 minute story. In May, I approached the attorney, Craig Nelson, and I said, I really need to discuss more details about what's coming down the pike here with my community. And yeah, there's a confidentiality agreement, but my legal view, and maybe lawyers overthink just like doctors overthink medicine, But my legal view is I'm not bound by any confidentiality agreement as a elected board member. As in that function, as the board, we cannot, but as elected board member, I have the right to discuss this with my community. So what happens, a week or two later, a confidentiality policy is circulated. And this confidentiality policy, among other really extreme provisions in my mind, had a clause in it that each board member has to sign a document that he or she will abide by this policy as a condition of being a member of this board. And at least I had it reviewed by my attorney, because this is not my specialty, and my attorney wrote a 5-page letter basically pointing out other items, so that basically this confidentiality policy could put board members into a situation where they will be required by policy to violate freedom of access laws. And I shared this, because I would work a lot, but a day or two before the meeting, or maybe on the day of the meeting, and this concern was out there, but there's such a dynamic on the board that it just voted this policy in without even considering even the most fundamental question that you cannot put a condition on a member of an elected member of a board created under state charter and so I was the only one, and maybe a second person at the time didn't, but I voiced, I said, I will not sign any paper. So this is
So to me, that's a prime example of what she just said.
Well, it's
The administrative
it's
has
basically
overtaken this board.
either that or there's a dynamic that people say, well, we just got to get this done now. We're down this road, and we just got to get to the finish line, and then it'll all be good. Well, it may be. I mean, in my opinion, it wouldn't be, but just this, to just say, okay, we voted down, and then the next meeting, mysteriously, all of a sudden, an amendment appears that strikes out this language, another language, that you'd be thrown off the board. Of course, that raises the question, where does this draft even come from? It doesn't come from
That's not coming from a hospital administrator.
But again, we're back to my August 20 information request. I said, I want to know what's going on here, so I will look behind the curtain, and I will not stop until I see what's behind it. Now, on the 15th or 16th of October, I sent a letter, with this going back and forth about meeting to narrow my request. And in that letter, I said, I would like to know when the communication data of this hospital gets backed up, when the last backup was, and when the last backup before August 20th, the date of my letter, was. And I expect these backups to be preserved. Now I get a letter today from the attorney, not even answering this simple question, and still going on about, oh, well, what you request is so much. This is a simple question, when was the last backup, or whatever, 12th of September, before it was on the 8th of August. I don't even get that much of a response out of them. And this is why I'm at the point, well, we'll just have to find another mediator to take care of this. And I'm not afraid to find them, But you know what that takes from me? Being up all weekend, working 15 hours or 20 hours to get this together, to get the right I have. Nobody else in a short period of time could probably do that around here, Yeah.
Whose attorney is this? Who is
Well,
Craig
that is a good question.
Is it the hospital?
HAD, correct?
No,
Well, if
No,
He's being paid by,
It's the board's attorney.
That's the
okay?
HAD.
So
it's
it's your
the board's
attorney.
attorney, so how come he communicates with administrator?
Huh? Because that they are a secondary person within the situation. I think in listening to this thing, because I want to take something back to the board from my town, okay? And let's not get into personal issues and your interpretation of getting data versus his. I don't even want to get into that.
No, it will be
Okay.
resolved. There's no
Yeah,
problem.
and again, that's your thing, fine. What I'm hearing here is that your feeling is that the administration is running the show, okay, making the decisions as opposed to the board. So I don't think I agree with that, but that right now that's not important. I think if you're going to write a letter, I think you need to either write a letter to the board. I'd like you to write a letter to the board saying, hey, here's the way I feel about this thing. Who's running the show? Okay, I will bring back on Wednesday the same feelings that you all have. Okay, You know, my plan has certainly been, you know, looking at this process and moving, and it has moved along because we've been at it for so long. But my point is that there's still room for negotiation in this thing. But I think you all, most importantly, should express your opinion, okay? And I will bring that back absolutely to the board. I mean, and
My concern, Rick,
No.
is that, if you guys are having a difficult time being heard, and it sounds like you are, at least at times, and there's not, this thing is moving on the tracks pretty fast now, we're getting near the end of the year. They don't really care what the three of us have. In fact, she basically
Well,
said.
they better care.
She basically said, we can
better
do this
care.
without you.
That's right.
And I
So-
think they do
What are the
care.
4 towns? Not to be,
I don't know which four have
but
turned
I
out.
mean, you said there's 4 towns that can do
Well,
this.
I do not know what legislation they propose. No, it's beyond me why, after asking for that, it hasn't been shown to me, whatever the draft is now.
What, you mean the agreement, Gerald?
No, the proposed charter amendment.
The emergency charter, the emergency.
The
what do you call
reworking
it?
of the charter.
Action.
Right,
Yeah.
So,
I don't
this.
know.
which
can
is
be-
critical to this whole
but
thing.
This could be worded in its extreme to make it a simple majority vote at the board, right? And it's basically those in the background who can draft it the way they think they can get it through.
Sure.
Right.
Well, so they can say, well, we're getting away with a 3/4 majority and we'll do that. Or we could say, you know, 2/3 of the members and 2/3 of the towns. You can come up with whatever. You can say, well, 2/3 of the town by popular vote have to support this. Of course, they do not want to do that because that would extend the process. Craig Nelson did at one point state that it will be, the board will have the final say, so I don't know whether this is still going to be the case or whether this is going to be changed, but you know, the point is that there's nothing clear here, and I think as far as my community is concerned, I don't think my selectmen feel much different than most of you probably do. Is this is a community assets. The communities should make the final decision by popular vote what's going to happen to it. In the case of Sebec, I don't know, Sangerville, this is the biggest asset Sebec has, by far.
It would be, yeah, Sangerville's not even
So-
close. Yes.
So that this all gets removed in the, you know, for the purpose of expediency or you know, well, we're tired at the end of a long process. I don't like it, and I haven't liked it all along, and I've shared.
To me,
I
the
shared with you
legislative-
emails that I sent out over the last 6-8 months.
The legislative part is as important as any part of this. I don't see how you can advance this without that being done.
To me, we're doing this, we're doing everything 100% backwards.
Yeah, literally.
I mean, seriously.
Well, it works
this
for
should
those
have-
who want to get it done.
That's
yeah.
the point, though, is it should have been the towns, all of the communities should have said yes. This is the amendment, this is what we want to do, this is what we need to go to the legislative for. If the towns agree for that, then have the amendment.
Then you
go
start
into-
negotiating.
Then you start negotiating. It's like,
Right.
we got this all negotiated, we're not gonna tell the towns anything, and we're just gonna get this done.
You're absolutely right.
It goes even further, and you're right, Mark.
Well, you're 2
If-
days
if
before
the-
the
Yeah,
vote,
yeah.
without a copy of the document.
If,
2 days before the vote.
And no legislative plan.
No,
if,
it's going to be presented next month after we sign the document. At which point, under the document, the authority is delegated to the CEO to agree on the amendments. Of course, I'm not going to say the CEO is going to go rogue, but the board, other than if the CEO decided to go rogue, I don't know, would have no recourse. There's no provision in
I
there.
don't think the board can give its authority away.
let me just clarify what you're saying. First of all, obviously, before anything goes through, to have a merger, you've got to change the legislation. But it goes further than that. Number
Oh,
one,
yes.
the Attorney General also has to sign off on this thing and can modify this any way that that person wants to, number one. Also signed off on this has to be Department of Human Services with regard to a CON. So again, you know, there's still murkiness in this whole thing. There's still other stopgap that's involved. So there's even more than what you're portraying or anyone else is portraying.
Well,
But
hang on.
again, the bottom line
I said,
is
Rick,
the
no.
merger.
I said this agreement delegates, after it's being voted on and signed, and I can guarantee you it will be signed the minute the hands go down, delegates the authority to amend and finalize the schedules to Marie. We're not allowed to show it, but that's what it says, in my understanding. Maybe I'm wrong. So, at that point, as far as the interaction with the counterbody Eastern Maine goes, that's who can sign off.
It has to, yes.
No, that is what the agreement says. And it is beyond me that 2 days prior to the vote on this hospital administration still thinks this is a document that cannot be shared with the communities. It was discussed in public session, put it on the table here.
When I asked her
You have
for
it,
that,
put it
she
on the
looked
table.
around as though, can we, where?
Yeah.
She was feigning, like she could share, I don't even know what she didn't say, no, you can't see it. She acted as though,
Yeah,
did
she
somebody
said,
bring one?
well, we can get that to you.
Yeah.
That's-
So what
No.
you're saying is, once this gets voted on and gets signed on Wednesday night,
That's my understanding.
after
as a
that, the
lawyer.
HED basically doesn't matter anymore
After-
because the administration can finalize.
After that, the terminal sequence has been started. I guess if you could talk about movies or something.
But I mean, seriously, I mean, the HAD is basically hands are tied.
The
Because,
renegotiation is possible as long as both parties agree at that point, but there's no more, if we don't get this, it's no deal. You're stuck and you're done in the deal. This is where we're at.
But the final sign-off still has to occur
What
before,
is a sign-off?
in terms of the final signing of this agreement occurs sometime next year when this is all finalized.
No,
Okay?
the
Oh,
only-
yes, there is.
the only-
Oh, yes, there is.
Yeah, but that might only require a majority.
Show it to me, show it to me. The only other vote is then to agree to the merger, once the
That's-
legislation is passed. Yeah, but then, if we say no at that point, there's a specific performance provision, and for Eastern Maine, so we can grab the assets. We signed,
damages.
we signed the contract where we can, I don't even know who for us. I mean, if I did this as an attorney for my client, I'd have a malpractice claim.
Again, I'm not an attorney, so I can't speak to that.
Well,
but if
I-
that's in there, well, so what you're saying is, if we agree to this contract Wednesday, and a year from now, when we have to sign the final, if HAD
There's
tries
no
to back
sign-
out,
there's no signing of
but
the final.
if there is, and we go to back out, Eastern Maine, because you already agreed to
Could
this,
enforce the
could
provision.
enforce it.
But my understanding is that
Because of the
also
damages they
Mayo
suffered
can
in the
also
process.
back out of this thing.
Please show it
There's
to
a
me.
clause up from,
Please show it to me.
Well, let's make sure,
Again.
let's make sure. Let's,
that is my
we
understanding.
need that, we need that assurance.
Well, first of all, we need to stop the signing on Wednesday,
Right.
which we don't have the authority to do. We don't have any authority, actually, but,
No, we're just addressing our concerns, is all.
we're just citizens that happen to have a forum.
Yeah.
But that's really,
Well, I think
You
at the
can
end
address
of
the
the,
legislature though, right?
when we get to the final, but by then, this thing is all cooked.
well, the
By the
only,
time you get it to that point, you're still under the part of the provisions.
well, if the legislative amendment fails, then there's an out.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Because then there's no deal. I mean, obviously, it's impossible to consummate the deal at that point.
Right, because they
But-
can't merge with an HAD.
But, well, yeah. But then the question becomes, well, what then?
Did we sign it?
Well, is there still specific, are there still
That they-
specific performance rights? I almost wanna say no, but why do we even sign a contract that has these rights given to somebody who doesn't give us a penny? I mean, the heck, you have no rights, you know? You can get this if we get this through, I guess. but
Yeah, if we
why
don't-
do we open up I mean, there's a provision in there that says and I don't know, maybe I'll get sued now for saying this, that the directors of the hospital of Mayo will support the proposed legislation.
so,
And that it's Mayo's duty
Which
to do
this-
that, and if the directors don't do it, there's a penalty.
this is legislation that hasn't been drawn up yet.
That's right.
How would you sign that?
I'm saying, how are either one of you gonna sign that?
Well, I know what I'll vote.
Again, something I feel strongly about, and I don't agree with a lot of the analysis, okay?
Well, but then tell me where I'm wrong
Okay.
on the content. Put the agreement on the table.
Yeah.
You are the representative of the
I've
staff. Put it
I've
on
read
the
the
table.
agreement, and I don't have a problem with the agreement.
Put it on the table. It's a public document.
I don't have the power to put it on the table.
Yes, you do.
Not me, well, again, I try to go, if this is a confidentiality issue, I go with a confidentiality issue, period. And I
So you
try
have
to
been
always
told,
play by the rules.
you have been
We'll
told,
check with MMA tomorrow.
so you have been told you.
Now, that
cannot
doesn't
share
mean
this
that
agreement.
you're gonna have to abide by what they say. But if MMA comes back and says, we can't imagine a scenario, they typically, when we're talking about a specific case, they're very reluctant. They're gonna say, turn it over to your attorneys. But in general terms, it'll be interesting to see if they can imagine a scenario where our elected representative can be required to sign, to make a commitment that he cannot share with us. I can't imagine any one of the three of us being able to do that.
No.
And you guys fall under the exact same
Confidential.
jurisdiction as
You
us.
guys are in the same rules we are.
We have the same FOA
My
requirements.
wife worked for a company, a state agency, all the same kind of stuff. And the executive sessions, rules, everything's the same. And everybody likes to bend them,
So
because it's
have
really
you been-
convenient.
Have you been informed that you cannot share this agreement?
Well, I have asked about it and been told basically to just hold off, that it's going to come to the public. I guess, and again, whether it's confidentiality issues, I haven't been forced to do anything. Again, I am a strict rule player, and again, I'm concerned that there's something relating to confidentiality, obviously, that doesn't allow me to turn that thing over.
But it could be that they're breaking the rules.
So you,
Who knows? I don't know. As I
But
said,
we need to know.
That's right, and I need someone to tell me and give me guidance. I'm not an attorney, okay? And again, I am not gonna break any rule that puts me, the hospital,
I wouldn't want
you,
you
or
to.
anybody else in
No, we
jeopardy.
don't break, I would never ever, that's not why,
Again,
why we're doing
I
this.
have read the contract time after time after time. I don't have personally a problem with it. I understand what Gerald has brought up, two specific points, in Article 12 and Article 7. I understand where he's coming from, beyond everything else. And again, I see it differently. I've asked questions, I've gone out and gotten opinions. You're concerned about the board being kind of masked and not being able to say anything with regard to the merger, not with regard to the merger legislation. That's what that 711 basically says. It doesn't have anything to do about talking about the merger itself. It has to do with specifically merger legislation.
I understand that, but there's another provision in this contract. Now, we're talking about
The contract.
section numbers, right? But it's not being put on the table. I mean, ask yourself, what's going on here? There's a provision in there that this new contract is still subject to the old confidentiality agreement, which again says you cannot share anything unless Eastern Maine consents to
But
it.
obviously, I would, obviously, and this is a question I have asked before, have we complied as a board, as a hospital, with the laws of the state of Maine, okay? I can only listen to a seasoned attorney who works for the board, who is the board's attorney, who tells me.
Who put the policy on the table of confidentiality that says we'll throw you off the board as an elected member
I don't
if
see that
you don't have?
ever.
I mean, and at that point, you still say this is the expert on the topic.
who's paying this attorney? Is the head for paying the attorney, or is the hospital administration paying for the attorney?
No, of course, the
The
board pays for
district
the attorney.
pays, I mean,
The hospital.
It's all our money.
Yeah, it's all,
I
there's
mean,
there's no separate
which is the board.
funds.
And again, also.
Well, it's
this
a question
has been-
of who does it
This has
truly
been
work.
run through another
That's the
attorney in
question.
Bangor.
There's no
okay?
line there.
There's no separation.
So we've had two attorneys that I've asked about this specific question, okay? And
But I mean, we're utilizing the same attorney for head four as for the hospital when it comes to this negotiation, this
Exactly.
process.
the attorney that we have, who Gerald is talking about, is the attorney for the board, okay? And I'll give you an example.
He's the attorney for the
Let-
board,
let-
for
let me just
administration,
finish,
for everything.
Gerald. Let me just finish. If, for instance, the CEO of the hospital has a different opinion than the board itself on an issue, whatever it is, and the hospital attorney is consulted about that issue, he would have to come to the board and say, here's a problem, and not even deal with the administration. It would be a board issue. So on paper, theoretically, however it's constructed, again, I'm not an attorney, that attorney is the board's attorney. I specifically asked him this question today because I didn't know.
He would be immediately conflicted under the rules of professional conduct.
Again,
You know,
maybe he
so
will,
this-
I don't know, but I will tell you, the attorney that's there is the board's attorney.
Okay, so the board's attorney doesn't send a member of the board the specifically requested draft of this
Right,
agreement
he's
3
working for
weeks
you.
ago.
He's working for you.
Yeah,
Gerald.
thank you.
Do you have the agreement?
Yes,
We have the minutes from the meeting that you did not attend.
yeah,
The minutes specifically address sections of the agreement.
yeah,
Therefore, the agreement is public record.
it is.
Can you
Then
walk
why have you supplied the agreement? No, I've read that.
Okay.
Have you supplied the agreement to your selectmen?
No, I have not, but I'm surprised that we get, I haven't been asked for it, but
You have been asked for it?
I have not.
Have not been asked.
If I would be asked, I would supply it. I mean, I'd say, well, let the chip fall here, because this is ridiculous. You cannot operate under the cover of darkness here.
Well, and you've not signed the confidentiality
No.
agreement. I know that Rick has,
Yeah.
just for full disclosure here.
Yeah.
So Rick has signed something that he is abiding by at this point. Gerald, you haven't. You could have brought that agreement with you tonight and provided it to us. You can give it to anybody, because you have not signed that
Well, I
confidentiality.
could or I couldn't, because the question is, what's the confidentiality agreement with Eastern Maine? And the real question is,
That's right.
no, the real question is, why are we not strong enough as a board to say, now it's 2 months before we have to vote on this agreement, even though we've never even seen it. And we do not wish this to be confidential, because we have a duty to our communities. I've brought this up in May. And the shoot went down the other way. No, we have to be more secretive, not less secretive.
I think
everybody's
I think
forgetting the
this-
idea that this is a public.
That's
They
right.
really had
This is
COVID.
not corporate America.
No, it isn't.
And that's the problem. I think the administrators of the hospital are steering this. I think they have manipulated the board into a manner that they think that all of this falls under corporate America rules.
Yeah.
And it's not corporate America.
So has any one of you requested this agreement?
Yes,
I did,
yes.
When?
right after the meeting.
So
Because
would the 5-day
Marie
clock
didn't
be
sound like
ticking?
we couldn't have it. She said, well, so I emailed Rick and asked that he send it to me, and if he needed to scan it, if it was large, bring it in here. And that's where it stood.
So this is a
And-
FOIA request you made.
That's
and-
true,
Yeah.
but you didn't respond to me and say, I can't share it with you, you just didn't respond. So
Well, it wasn't until today that I could finally, on a Monday, get a hold of the hospital attorney to find out what I was supposed to do. My attitude is very simple. If I think there's ever a question of confidentiality, I stop what I'm saying, I ask somebody who knows more than I do. It's that simple, and that to me is playing by the rule. Gerald obviously understands the law a hell of a lot better than I do. I just did not feel comfortable doing that. Again, one thing I did feel comfortable doing is making sure, okay, that everything was within the bounds of law of the state of Maine, with regard to release of documents, with regard to provisions, et cetera, and I was assured by 2 of the attorneys that in fact was the case.
Do you have
I
it
can't
in
go any
writing?
further than that. Huh?
Do you have it in
George
writing?
Eaton is the other one.
Do you have it in writing?
No, I mean,
would you be willing to submit that confidentiality agreement and any other documents and to our town's attorney to get an opinion as to whether you're bound by that?
I believe that the confidentiality agreement is public knowledge, number one, and there's no reason I would have to give it to your attorney. I would give it to you,
Okay,
okay?
and Melissa?
If in fact that
we'll
is
see if
the
it's
case.
enforceable. This is amazing to me that my elected officials are being muzzled. I've never heard of such a thing. And you're negotiating our asset.
I believe that would be public knowledge, but again,
Well,
I'm
I
guessing,
mean-
and until I can ask,
Sure.
No, I appreciate that, totally.
But I didn't sign this, and even on the revised policy, they circulated again people to sign the document. I didn't sign it. There was no action taken against me.
Right.
And you
so
still got the agreement.
So you are not bound. You're not bound. You
No,
did
Well,
not
nobody
sign.
is bound.
No,
Rick
one
can
of-
rescind his signature, say this, I unsigned this, you know?
What I'm
I
saying
accept
is you have two board members here,
Yeah.
one has signed this
Right, right.
confidentiality, one hasn't.
Right.
You
Right.
have the agreement?
Yeah.
This confidential agreement?
I don't think it's confidential at all.
Well, how
But
can
you
it be
still have it.
confidential? They just, the attorney went through section by section by section about
It was
the
a public,
agreement.
it was a public
That's
meeting.
right. So if we had gone to that meeting, was the agreement up on a board? I mean, or did you each have one in your
We have a
packet?
handwritten one. Don't you somewhere within the municipal, or I can ask Lois would know, isn't there somewhere, for instance, if you're discussing an employment issue or a personnel issue, isn't there some confidentiality within the
Oh, sure.
municipal?
Oh, we do it all the time.
Executive session.
Right.
Yeah,
As long as it's an
but you're,
individual.
yeah, it has to be very specific.
And then you would basically say, okay, you would use that perhaps within executive session
Yeah,
and
that's
say,
the only way.
we're going into
That is
executive
the
session.
only way.
Right.
You have to state.
So any
specific
document,
purpose,
if you was in an
have a
open meeting,
recorded
it's public.
vote.
But there's very few exceptions.
Statute.
The statute isn't there so that you can speak and everybody not know what you're talking. That's not it's in the case of an employee, it's to protect their privacy. In fact, the employee can waive it. Say, no, I want my hearing in public.
Right.
It's not to protect the board, it's to protect the employee.
No,
Yeah.
Correct.
And
So-
all,
There's
all-
no secrecy.
all the provisions of this act are basically outline the maximum secrecy allowed, not the minimum required. I mean, the other laws, like the employee laws, what have you, they overlay this, and the board has passed a policy that is even beyond the maximum in my understanding, and at least in the understanding of my attorney who has done municipal law for 30 years. So that these concerns have been known to the board. I even made a motion to table this revised policy until we get a certification from our attorney that it complies with the law.
So what you're
And this motion was seconded and voted down without
So,
discussion.
Gerald, what's happening then?
Yeah.
And again,
Yeah, well,
maybe
you
I've
know
been
what's
very,
happened.
what
Yeah,
I've
we
been maybe very, very naive, is that what you're saying is that basically the board attorney, in looking at this and approving of this policy, has been either negligent or committed malpractice.
In proposing the first policy that had a provision on it that said, as a condition of being a member of this board, you have to sign this, or we won't let you sit here, or we have a penalty provision if you
But
break
is
this,
that-
we'll throw you off.
Is that negligence or malpractice?
Well-
I don't know, I'm asking.
Well,
I'd like to learn.
I think this is something the board should discuss in executive session,
Well,
what
we're
to
not
do.
lawyers, but we're not lawyers. That's what I'm saying.
I am a lawyer.
That's why I'm asking you.
Yeah.
It is.
That's what my answer is, that's what the board should discuss in executive session and address.
But how can they address it if they're not attorneys? I'm just asking a simple question.
Well, then they would retain an attorney.
It's incumbent
advise
to
them
learn
in
the rules.
process.
We have to do it.
I mean, what's so complicated here?
We have to do it. We're required to educate ourselves so we know the rules, because there's liabilities. The board
Yeah.
members have to
But
know the
that's
rules.
exactly what I'm trying to do, is to educate myself, because I'm not an attorney, to say to myself, well, wait a minute. Was this an issue where, in fact, we voted on something assuming, having had input, that this in fact was a legal process, which I specifically asked for, as did a number of other people. I was getting an opinion. I mean, that I want to, it sounds to me like an attorney, no name, says that this is in fact a not a legal thing to do. That's what I'm taking away from this, okay?
I can
In
understand
educating
this.
myself.
Yeah,
I get it. I mean, there's a whole
I mean,
team
he's
of
sitting
you
there
there.
with the town, their attorney.
19 other guys,
Right.
and gals. So
I myself, I don't trust anybody, so if you're gonna present something for me to sign, I'm
You're
gonna
like
make
me
sure.
there.
Yeah.
I'm
It's
saying-
gotta be right. I mean,
I'm paranoid.
what are we gonna do? Do we want to engage with the newspaper? Do we want to reach out to other municipalities? We've uncovered quite a myriad of concerns here, from the lack of negotiation to the way this thing is kind of being rushed, like you said, it's almost like we're at the altar, we might as well finish this thing. And I don't think any of us have a good feeling about it. So the question is, are we gonna ring the bell? Are we gonna say,
I think as far as writing it in the newspaper, I think that's really, 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 really opening it up wide. And not that it shouldn't be, but what does that do?
Well, can I add on to that?
Sure.
We got 2 days.
You know,
So, I mean,
I mean, I'm not being literally, they're voting, they're signing in 2 days. You can
the
look at
landscape changes in 2 days? I don't
so
know how
when's the
significantly.
paper come out?
that was my point where I was going.
Could you, as a board, get together as quickly as possible? You're right, time is really beyond short. Exactly what you have expressed in writing, with questions, going to administration, right now, okay?
Why would you talk to the help all the time?
That's,
No,
you're asking us to do the
Excuse
same
me,
thing we
excuse
did
me.
last time.
The board and/or administration and/or both.
No, the board runs this. The board runs the hospital district. Administration
Correct.
follows instructions of the board.
Answers to
What-
the
no,
board.
Administration advises the board, and the board makes the final decision. We're not out there trying to run the day-to-day operations of the hospital
Did I say
based on
that?
employment, human
Well,
services. That's what we have these people for, to advise us what to do. There's no other way you can do it. Either way, I'm not gonna argue with you on that. Is there a way? Because I think the issues you're talking about, before you go to the paper, before you go to whatever else you want to do, okay, and that's your decision, I think out of courtesy, okay, no matter what has gone on, whether you feel, or I feel, or anybody feels that this was not done in the correct fashion, why not get the questions to them and have them get answers back to you right away?
To,
Okay?
to who?
To the board and/or administration right now.
I can tell you
When's the
that
next
I
time
feel
you-
we had that meeting with
Let's
administration.
just say, we spent
And I
an
felt
hour.
very disrespected, and I don't feel that they provided us
That's
I don't think
truthful
it was sincere.
information. We're
I
sincere.
feel bad that in fact happened, because I don't feel, that's not a good thing.
No, it was unfortunate, but I don't, and they're welcome back anytime.
Reasonable.
They can have another hour or two anytime they want it. But they were not interested in these sorts of discussions.
Not at all.
Well, guess what then? That alone should be a letter that goes back to the board.
What will a letter do? What will a letter
What can a
do?
letter do? A letter can advise that these reasonable people have a concern, and that you in fact felt that way. I didn't make that.
My hope is to
Wouldn't
get
that be your
the
job?
folks in
Well,
Guilford.
No, I can do both. Yes, it is
Dexter.
my job, and yes, I plan to do that. You're absolutely correct. But I think a letter coming from this board and a credible group of people is as important that something is in fact beyond someone who is on the board. Okay,
So
that's how I deem
At
it.
a minimum, we would have to table.
What's the downside
The
of them writing a
contract
letter?
on
What's the
Wednesday.
downside of
No,
writing
there's
a
no
letter? Gerald?
downside.
No, I don't, whatever we write,
There was
I'm
no
happy to send it to the
downside
board.
There
I
was
just,
no
I doubt how
downside to
effective
me
it's gonna
writing
be.
my letter either.
Who does the administration answer to?
The board,
The board.
Okay, so the board is above the administration.
correct.
The board oversees the administration.
Correct.
So a letter should go to the board, and then they should come down on the administration and say, get your act together.
That's a reasonable
You're
thing.
No,
disrespecting.
I would totally, whatever we write to anybody will also go to the board. The question is, who else are we gonna include? Because I question
All the other
how
communities.
successful reaching out to the board is gonna be. But that, hopefully it's very successful.
I will make sure that, or to the best that I can do, that it is in fact
Your senator,
successful.
your congressmen, your representatives.
Well,
So what's-
basically you're saying
Everybody.
newspaper.
Yes.
I mean, if you send it to all of them, and you're right, I think this, Paul Davis, for example, this affects a lot of people in his district.
Yeah.
I think each of the, much the way Sebec did for us, I think it's our turn to return the favor to the other towns. I think that Dexter and Dover and all those other towns should be made aware of our concerns. If we have any expectation at all that we're gonna change the direction of this, or at least enhance it.
Yeah, and my only thing is, everything we tell them needs to be 100% factual.
Correct.
And therefore, that's not something we can pen tonight, you know.
And that's what's hard about writing a letter, is how do you write a letter and have it interpreted in that manner? I'm not saying you can't, I'm just saying,
Right, I mean,
I bet
if we
we
write
can.
something for the newspaper, it has to be 100% factual, and so we can't say, well, we think, or,
Correct. No, but I bet we can do that.
All right, so
Yeah.
here, and I want to take this back to the board. Give me a list of concerns.
Well, the biggest one that jumps out at me is
I-
the lack of negotiations.
I've heard, but you know what, I want to get it accurately. I want to make sure it's exactly what you're talking about and go from there.
but excuse me, you will take this to the board on Wednesday?
No, I'm going to call the chairman of the board tonight, and I will call the administrator after talking to her tomorrow.
Actually, I would ask them to listen to this audio. It'll be posted by morning.
Yeah, just,
They will know exactly how we all feel.
Okay?
And so will anybody else who tunes
But
in.
I want to make sure. that-
No, this is a
that
great
somebody is
opportunity.
listening
And
on
you
the
should
other
also
side.
listen to the meeting from Wednesday.
yeah, because Wednesdays are up.
They're up. And that really gives you a nice feel for how the administration felt about the whole process.
Because I don't want to miss anything that has been said here, whether I
No,
agree,
but
disagree, or
No,
in
no.
go to the
between.
tape.
I think
Yeah.
Go to the tape.
someone
Go to the
besides me on that board, i.e. the chairman and/or others, need to hear that, what you're.
What I would like for the three of us to do is let's work on a letter. I make no commitment that we're gonna send this to anybody until we have consensus, or that's my hope. Let's the three of us work on a letter. There won't be an action. We can work on it. Lois will always be involved in it. Everything that we write is subject to a FOIA request. And if we can come up with a document that we are happy with, or someone wants to make a motion on, that's where we'll end up. And if we can get that done tomorrow, sometime tomorrow, I'll suggest another emergency meeting.
I would schedule it now, I mean, because you
Yep.
need your 24, well, emergency, you don't.
Now, we may not get to it, we may get to not have a letter that we feel is ready, and so we might not have the meeting, but let's give it a good faith effort. I think we can come up with something that references this recording. You want it to be factual? We've got some really candid stuff here. Does that seem like a reasonable approach?
yeah, my only thing is, that's fine, that's fine. I just want to make sure that we know exactly what it is that we have to negotiate. And, you know, that it's.
What are
all-
our concerns?
Okay,
That's really, we
Right.
don't have any negotiating power.
right,
But I think we have some concerns with this process.
The
yeah.
process is the concern.
And I'm convinced that the majority of the folks in these towns that are affected, they have absolutely no idea what we know.
I agree,
And that troubles me.
Yeah.
I think they have a right to know. And that in itself, just that understanding could change the whole temperature of this thing.
Well, the reality of all this is on Wednesday, unless the vote gets postponed, the agreement gets voted on.
Will
That's the
it
state.
pass? I mean, is there any question in your mind that it will pass?
I would suspect it would.
How do you postpone it?
How?
Public
Can it
meeting?
be postponed?
Well, I will do what I can do as I outlined before, and we'll see where that gets us, or me, and us as far as my own town. But
Would you be in favor of postponing it?
I don't think it's postponable, this is.
But if you were given a vote,
I certainly will talk to the board chair about that possibility, but
You know how this gets postponed? A motion is made, seconded, a majority vote postpones it, done.
But if-
There's
How
no-
would you,
But-
could you explain that just?
Wait, then you have to have a majority vote to pass that,
That's right.
okay? And if you don't have the majority vote.
Well, if you
it's
don't
like
make,
Well,
not
but
having
the
if
a
you
question
don't make
was-
the motion, you don't have a vote.
No, but I understand where Rick was coming from with regard to, did he think it could be postponed? You think the majority is gonna vote
No.
to pass it?
I do.
So I think that's.
I do.
I think that's,
I do.
And
That's the challenge.
I may be putting, but that is what I thought, how you were answering that question.
But
I
But,
do.
and I understand what you're saying, that you're saying, yes, it can be postponed if we have the majority saying
Well,
we want to postpone.
But there are two issues here. One is to vote yes eventually. The other one is to put this on the table until this is fleshed out, until the information is before everybody, because then you still can vote yes.
Correct.
Down the
But
road.
on
You both answered the
Wednesday,
same question, but you're
I
on different
know.
sides of it.
Yeah,
on Wednesday,
yeah.
in theory, it can be postponed. But Rick is saying, in reality,
If the
he
majority
was
is
trying to answer
already-
the question that,
If the majority already
Right,
is
I think-
for passage,
Right,
you
that
can
it
make all
will
the
not be
motions you
postponed.
want, it isn't gonna make a difference.
Right,
Unless
but
you
my-
do
That's
something
exactly what
else.
you're saying, Gerald, that is a method that one
Yes, yes,
theoretically could
absolutely.
But it won't win.
postpone a vote.
My question was though, would you support postponing? And you don't have to answer because once a motion's made, there's a discussion. And you might end up one side or the other. But if you want to answer, I'd be curious. Do we have two board members here who are supporting postponing or one and one maybe?
At this juncture, and I would still vote for it based on all the research that I've done, all the time that I've spent, my theory on exactly where medicine is going in our area, and in addition, having read the contract time after time after time, and having been assured that we are within, which is in the contract, within the legality of the law, I would. Again, if something catastrophic came up, which in fact was where in fact the legal opinion was not correct, okay, based on solid evidence,
Which
that's a
legal
whole,
opinion now?
the hospital board opinion.
No, I only spoke about the confidentiality policy, that's all I spoke to.
I'm talking about the whole, that we have complied with everything that we need to with regard to confidentiality, with regard to our contract, et cetera, okay? That would be the only thing that in fact would sway me the other way, okay? My feeling is that this will most probably go through. Again, I have not seen, I know that there have been towns which in fact have already made a commitment to write a letter. I hear exactly what you're saying, okay? Again, I definitely want to bring that back to the board. I think it's important. And I think it's important that everybody be heard in the community. So that's exactly what I will do, and that will be done tonight.
Yeah,
but will that change anything?
That happens on a 2-week notice, and think about it, we're concerned about the community being informed, but we're not proposing an agreement. This is the first time we even saw it, 2 weeks prior to a vote. If we want to amend our bylaws, we have to show the proposal one meeting, and a month later we vote on it. And here we are voting to keep a shop away on a 2-week
It's only $28
notice.
million.
Yeah, it's only a
Yeah.
$50 million hospital.
Yeah.
Yeah, but-
You don't need it more than a couple of weeks.
No, I actually don't.
Turns out. So, is there anything else that we want, we're gonna work on a letter. Is there anything else that either one of you guys wanna consider, or?
I mean, do we want to talk about how we're going to put this letter together with regard to, should we do a workshop and sit and pound out the letter all together?
I think that personally, independently, through emails, CC everybody, if we get down to kind of a critical mass, then we'll come in and finish it up. If we don't get there, we'll cancel the meeting. There's no point in coming in here and just totally spinning our wheels. But if we can get at least 2/3 of us feeling like, okay, yeah, let's do this, then I'm game.
And the letter is going to, is targeting whatever, just so I know.
My thought is other selectmen. That's,
Right,
and
okay,
councils, that's
okay.
kind of the way to go.
Yeah,
Because realistically, the only way to stop, because I'm assuming Wednesday meeting gonna be a public meeting. They're gonna do this all as a public forum.
Absolutely, standard board meeting scheduled.
The only way this is gonna stop is as many selectmen or town representatives as possible, if they all had our concerns, attend and voice their concerns.
Of course, of interest is also,
No.
I think last Wednesday's meeting, I don't think it was properly published as a non-regular meeting, even though it's a public meeting.
well,
And
wasn't
that-
it
that
a
seems to
workshop?
be-
Wasn't it a workshop?
Well, but still has to be published,
Oh,
right?
yeah,
Yes.
because the board gathers.
Yes.
Yeah, we're under the same rules.
Yeah.
Well,
So, and as far as the newspaper goes, we'll make that determination.
So you want this meeting for tomorrow? What
Yep,
time?
4 o'clock. And if we're ready, we'll have it. If we're not, we won't.
Okay.
Anything further? Motion to adjourn?
Second.
In favor, everyone? We are adjourned. It's 6:10.